What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be breaking down Steve Shives' bullshit. Oh man, there was so much to unpack in this video, man. It was ridiculous. And I noticed that uh, this seems to be a favorite pastime among a lot of the YouTubers I watch, and that's shitting on Steve Shives because, let's be honest, his ideas are totally shit. They're hilarious, and it was really fun to debunk them. So let's get into it.
Not every argument is valid. Not every position is reasonable. Not every proposition deserves to be debated. Why do I have to spell this out?
While I agree that not every argument is valid, not every position is reasonable, like the Nazi position. They're totally unreasonable, but they should be debated. When civil debate happens, it is and always the best way to expose how bad ideas are, Steve. Have you ever asked yourself this? Because it seems like you haven't. If you think your ideas are so great and that your ideas hold the real candle to justice, liberty, and freedom, then you would be begging to debate these people, Steve. But I forgot, you block everyone who disagrees with you.
Number one, it polarizes discourse. The balanced fallacy is what we call it when two sides of an argument are treated as having equal value regardless of context or merit.
In this video, Steve is going to talk about the arguments of neo-Nazis and the counter-protesters that took place in Charlottesville and all that. And just like Steve, he is automatically assuming that everyone who has defended the alt-right or the neo-Nazis' freedom of speech is somehow sympathetic to their views, or in his own words, find them to have equal value. By not naming names, he can just throw this shit in the air and present no evidence, like other anti-SJWs and YouTubers like Sargon of Akkad, Shoe on Head, and Roaming Millennial, people who he finds to be terrible people, and hopefully me soon. We do not think neo-Nazis' ideas are of equal value. We actually outright despise them, Steve. But we do support their constitutional and human right to hold these views.
Which can be ironic given the fact that often people who are making the appeal are anything but a moderating influence on the discourse.
Again, Steve mentions no names and presents no evidence of this whatsoever. And but he's obviously talking about the other anti-SJWs who have called out the neo-Nazis, and they have also called out the far-left activists like Antifa for using violence to shut down people who disagree with them. Steve thinks because people have called out the far left for their regressive views, we automatically agree, or we are on the side of the alt-right. We're automatically neo-Nazis just because we actually called out the bullshit that the left peddles. And it's this black and white thinking that so many people are just sick of. People are just sick if you're not with us, then you're against us mentality that the far left, that's you, Steve, and that the far right, like Richard Spencer, operate on. It's these principles that you guys operate on, and we're fucking sick of it. And contrary to popular belief, Steve, the majority of Americans are not racist, and we despise the bigotry that both sides perpetuate.
Let's imagine a hypothetical confrontation between, I don't know, a group of organized white supremacists carrying Nazi flags and a group of anti-racist counter-protesters, just to pluck a totally random example out of thin air.
Since he's a douche and he pretends that Charlottesville never happened, Steve wants to also pretend that the far left did no violence whatsoever. Now, I want to distinguish between Antifa and the counter-protesters, because the counter-protesters were just that. They were just protesters, and they end up having to defend themselves. But Antifa showed up and started doing offensive violence, and then the neo-Nazis had to defend themselves. And I hate to break this to you, Steve, but the alt-right, whatever, they have every constitutional right to march and to protest and to espouse their views as long as they're doing it peacefully. Just like the counter-protesters have every right to show up and oppose their viewpoints as long as they're being peaceful, as long as they don't engage in offensive violence. And when Antifa showed up, That's when things became intense and they got violent. And while I do acknowledge that it was the neo-Nazis who ended up killing an innocent person, it still does not excuse the violence done by Antifa. When things become violent, no matter what side is protesting or whatever, it's no longer a protest. It's just a battle. It's just violence. Period. It's no longer a protest. And don't get me wrong, Charlottesville was a complete shit show. It was the shit show of the fucking year. And almost everyone agrees with that. But the main point, though, is we have to call out unjustified violence on both sides or any side that does it. But people like you and the mainstream media want to ignore it every time when it comes to the left. Every time when it comes to the left, you guys just completely ignore the violence. You just outright ignore it. You fucking willfully close your eyes and say, nope, don't want to see, nothing to see here. Don't talk about it. And this absolutely goes against Martin Luther King's principle, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You want to go against the king, Shives? You want to go against a black man's advice, you fucking racist?
During a discussion about this confrontation, some people side with the counter-protesters. Some people side with the Nazis. They're off the Christmas card list. But some people come down in the middle. And these folks in the middle, they say things like, oh, certainly we don't support the Nazis. Those guys are just the worst. But let's not forget about some of those protesters. They were pretty aggressive. And the Nazis did have a permit to be there after all. Did the protesters have a permit? Now, instead of an argument with only one reasonable side, and that would be the non-Nazi side, in case I need to mention it, the folks in the middle are creating the illusion that both sides are equivalents of one another. Yeah, sure, the Nazis do some bad things, the protesters do some bad things. Let's just try to remain unbiased here and be reasonable about this, shall we?
People who side with the Nazis, Steve, are going to be fellow Nazis. People who sided with the counter-protesters do side with the protesters' denouncement of racism, which I agree with. But they also ignore the offensive violence of Antifa, like I've got to say. And the people in the middle, of course, like I said before, Steve Shives is going to create some more straw mans. And people in the middle, Steve, we are not making equivalences or false equivalences here. We actually side with the counter-protesters who are against actual racism and the regressive attitudes of the neo-Nazis. We agree completely with that. What we have a problem with is people like you ignoring far-left radicals who are also fascists that do violence because they have no interest in trying to debate. They want to violently shut down anyone who they see as right-wing. Holy shit, Steve. No wonder you've become the joke of the YouTube community. The reason why we call you a regressive leftist, it is because you are the biased one. You are the one who refuses to be objective. You have your head so far up your ass, and you are so devoted to your ideology, you refuse to look at the hard truths.
Number 2, it legitimizes extremism.
No, it doesn't, Steve. We in the middle are the ones who are constantly calling out extremism all the time, whether it be Islamic extremism. I know that's Islamophobic of me. But we also call out the far-right extremism and their lunacy, but we also call it out on the far left. We are constantly working to delegitimize extremism of all kinds. But you and way too many people are the ones who are creating these false equivalences, which you are clearly not aware of. That is what really legitimizes extremism.
Yeah, those Nazis who were obviously contemptible fascists a moment ago, now they're just some people who disagree about stuff with some other people.
Yes, neo-Nazis are fascist by nature and by definition. But so are Antifa, you dumb fuck.
They're not an inherently violent threat to liberty and democracy, they just have a different point of view. Hey, I wonder why they believe the things they believe. You know, I heard they don't even think of themselves as Nazis. Maybe they have good reasons for holding a rabidly ethnocentric worldview. Let's ask them.
They're not, Steve, because the majority of the people are against their views. but we also don't want to forcefully change their views. I know that's a horrible concept to you, and it's a confusing one, but I actually do want to know where they're coming from, so I can understand them. So I know how I can persuade them or try to persuade them and show the error of their ways. Show them compassion, debate them, not use violence. Violence only perpetuates more violence, and we can't have that. The only way is through diplomacy. And Steve and the more and more people seem to reject this idea. It is wrong.
Now, instead of arguing over how to stop Nazis, we're arguing over whether or not Nazis might have a point sometimes. Good thing this is just a hypothetical example, huh?
We have already established that that's actually not what's happening, you squirrel-faced fuck.
Number 3, it enables appeals to a false middle.
In this number, Steve just continues to spout the bullshit that the middle is just excusing the extremism, which I have actually debated that this is bullshit, so let's move on.
Number 4, it justifies apathy. Here's the attractive thing about the balanced fallacy. Life in the false middle is easy. You get to pretend that you're above it all, on the moral high ground. You're not biased. Your logic hasn't been clouded by appeals to your emotions or morality. You haven't been seduced by one side or the other, drawn into this messy, partisan bickering like the rest of these poor schmucks. You're one of the reasonable ones. You're out of the fray, watching from the sidelines, able to point out the virtues and faults of both sides. If you feel like it, you don't have to. In other words, you can choose to do nothing.
In this clip, Steve is actually talking about the people in the actual middle. People who actually don't care about any of these issues and all that. And to be honest, I don't care about them either, because they don't want nothing to do with the conversation. And that's perfectly fine. They just want to go about their lives. They're apolitical. And are they pretentious for thinking that they are above such issues? Sure. But hate to break it to you, Steve, they have that choice. They have the choice to do nothing. It's their fucking life. They get to choose whether or not to do things. It's called freedom, you douchebag.
Are cops murdering black folks in alarming numbers? Some of those protesters at the Black Lives Matter rally were chanting some pretty rude slogans, though, so I can't really take a side. I'd better just do nothing.
Point 1 is false. And according to the Washington Post, in 2016, 233 black people were killed by police. 2017, 139, 94 less than the previous year. In 2016, 465 white people were killed by police. 2017, 256 white people were killed by police. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for the police, because it doesn't matter what color it is. Those numbers are way too high. I do believe that we do have a problem with cops in this country, but I don't think it's a systemic racist cop problem. I think it's a systemic incompetent cop problem. But that's another topic for another time. And point 2, Black Lives Matter have shouted things like death to cops, death to all cops, death to all white people. They have rioted and they've looted in the streets and have caused offensive violence. Are you going to talk about any of that, or are you going to legitimize extremism?
Women make less money, have their bodily autonomy constantly threatened, and are frequently targets of sexual harassment and assault. But hey, some of those feminists are kind of extreme too. I think I'll just do nothing.
Do I really have to debunk this? I mean, seriously. All the points he made have been debunked a million times. Do I really have to? Nah, I'll do it anyway. While I agree with you that women should have access to abortion and birth control, women are not making less money because of the patriarchy. It's because they choose not to take higher paying jobs as men. Holy shit, dude. Still spewing this propaganda. It's just pathetic at this point, dude. And a woman intentionally showing cleavage and ass and someone commenting, "Hey, nice tits and ass, babe," on Instagram is not sexual harassment. And when it comes to sexual assault, should we teach them to protect themselves? Or is that misogynistic of me?
Nazis, mobilizing in larger numbers than they have in decades, are marching in the streets, running people over with cars, beating people with poles. Sure, that's terrible, but what about those protesters who pulled down that statue? They didn't have a permit to do that. I can't stand with people who would resort to vandalism. Goodness gracious. I'll just do nothing.
Steve, we've already established, yes, Nazis are horrible people, and the death of Heather Haley is a freaking tragedy, and I hated that it happened. But here you go again in ignoring the reality of far-left violence. And it makes you look like a total pathetic human being if you just go out and vandalize property. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the statue or not. You can't just vandalize property. We're supposed to be better than this. They should have went through the proper channels to have it removed. If you did that, so many people wouldn't be outraged by it.
You get the point yet?
Yeah, Steve, I do. I understand that you're a cuck. You're a cuck to feminism, an Antifa apologist, a Black Lives Matter apologist, and you can't handle someone criticizing you or any of the falsehoods that you and regressive leftists constantly push. We do get it. You're a fake liberal, Steve. Okay? You're not a liberal. You're a regressive. Get over it.
Number 5, it obstructs moral clarity. Compromise is good. Moderation is good. Sometimes two sides of an argument are extremes, and the most reasonable position does lie somewhere between those extremes. But sometimes, and folks, this is one of those times, the only morally acceptable thing to do is to choose a side.
Steve, we all have chosen a side. You've chosen the side to apologize for far-left violence. There's people who are on the neo-Nazi side that are sympathetic to neo-Nazis and they espouse neo-Nazi views. Yes, absolutely. But there's also people on another side that you claim to be the middle. People you claim to think they are equal. This isn't the case, okay? We are the actual reasonable people that call out both sides. We are sick and tired of the apologetics and the extremism on both sides, Steve. And this is the other thing that annoys a lot of people, Steve, is that you think that you can claim moral superiority over everybody. You think you are morally superior to everyone who does not espouse, who does not hold every specific detail of your worldview. This is the problem people have, Steve. It's getting on our fucking nerves.
And when one side is full of Nazis, carrying Nazi flags, chanting Nazi slogans, beating and murdering people, and the other side is full of people determined to stop those Nazis from advancing one more inch. If you care at all about justice or equality, if you want to have any hope for a future for this country that is peaceful and tolerant and free, then you don't belong in the middle, professing opposition to the Nazis, but wagging your finger at the counter-protesters putting themselves in harm's way as well, because sometimes they go too far too, and those Nazis have a right to peaceably assemble after all.
You know, it's becoming more and more apparent that Steve does not give a shit about the First Amendment at all. Jesus, man. We are against racism, Steve. Most of us are naturally against it, okay? But the alt-right and those neo-Nazis, they had every single right to assembly and to protest and to march. They have every single right to do that, Steve. Just like the counter protesters and people who are against white supremacy, they have every single right to protest that as well. They have every single right to. But Steve, the First Amendment is not to just protect speech you agree with. It's to protect speech you don't agree with, that you don't like, okay? And I already know that you would fucking love to switch the First Amendment to only protect speech that you like. And Steve, don't even start about talking about tolerance, okay? Because you're one of the most intolerant people on the fucking internet. And that's saying something, man. You block every single person that respectfully disagrees with you on feminism. You just block them. You don't want to hear their opinion. You are not tolerant. You are not tolerant of anyone else's point of view. Even when it's not Nazism, even when it's not far right, when it's center left views, you oppose those. You oppose center left people. Jesus Christ, man. You talking about tolerance is fucking hilarious and highly ironic.
There is no balance between Nazis and people who want to stop Nazis. You're either on one side or the other. So get off the fence and pick one. And if unqualified, unequivocal condemnation of Nazis is not something you're willing to do, don't worry about it. You've chosen a side already. The hardest part is picking only 5. Catch you next time.
Steve, to your first point, we do want to stop Nazis. We don't want Nazis taking over, okay? You act like we do want that, okay? What we don't want is to have it done through violence. How many fucking times do we have to say it? And again, we do unequivocally and vehemently disagree with Nazis, and we don't want it around. We don't. But, unlike you, we don't label everyone who is right-wing a Nazi. Anyone who is a conservative is not a Nazi. And you know why we do that? You know why I do that? It's because I'm a liberal. Okay? It's because I believe in the freedom of the individual, Steve. You obviously don't. Okay? The problem with you and your side, the regressives, is that's all you do is just these stupid buzzwords, misogynist, racist, rape apologist, homophobic, transphobic, all that bullshit. Anyone who disagrees with you are all those things by definition. And we are sick of it. Okay? Look, Steve, I don't think you're a bad guy. I really don't. I really don't think he's a bad guy at all. I just think he's a moron. I just think he has his head so far up his ass, and he is just so emotionally tied to his ideology that he reacts in this way to just any type of opposition. It's ridiculous. And you heard me. I did get a little boiled. My blood did boil a little bit because I do get triggered. I do get triggered by stupidity. And I was triggered beyond belief about the neo-Nazis, to be honest. I was, because their views are just so fucking stupid. I mean, let's be honest. They're regressive as well. Neo-Nazi views are fucking stupid. They make my blood boil too. I get triggered, to be honest. But I also get triggered by your type of stupidity, Steve. This is why we need discussion. We need to show, even to you, Steve, to you to SJWs or to even neo-Nazis, we have to show compassion. We have to show human decency. We have to practice diplomacy. We have to practice civility, or else we'll always be stuck. You'll never be able to persuade someone from escaping their extremist views. We have to show human compassion. It's the only way. But Steve just wants to willfully ignore them, wants to treat them less than human. You know, what bothers me the most, probably, about Steve is that he actually is a very talented man. I mean, his videos are actually pretty good as far as they are well put together. I mean, yeah, his commentary is full of shit, but his work and the way he puts videos together is really impressive. They're way better than mine. But Steve, you gotta understand, this is a consequence of a free society, that we are gonna have people with opposing viewpoints, and you gotta live with them. It doesn't matter if they're extreme or not. If they're center left from you or center right from you, it doesn't matter. This is what freedom, this is what democracy is all about. This is what the West is all about, Steve. And you got to get past it. You got to get past this you're with us and against us bullshit. And not just you. Everyone who is on the extreme right as well. They got to get past it as well. You know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.